And I do only see one way to do that, namely to be very bold, to have to be very bold, and to say we do not need the IMF in the future anymore. See, this is the simple answer. If all the BRICS countries and maybe other, including other developing countries,
Hello and welcome to our podcast. My name is Lauretta Ojukwu. I am the Vice Chairman of Eurafrican-Alliance. Eurafrican-Alliance is a non-profit organization based in Germany, and our goal is to change the view the world has about Africa. We believe that Africa can be an equal partner to the global north. In fact, the whole of the global south can be an equal partner to the global north. And we promote projects that contribute to removing any shortcoming Africa might have, and also explaining to the global audience about the situations in Africa. Currently, we're promoting a project on farming in Africa, where our goal is to digitalize farming and make the farming industry or the farming work itself more efficient for the farmers. One of the ways we'll also promote this view of Africa being an equal partner to the global south is through this podcast that we're showing today. We invite renowned economists to discuss about the global economy and also the economy in Africa. We have found that this has opened the eyes of our audience to understand the difficulties in Africa and also provide some solutions to solve that problem. Today, I have with me Professor Dr. Flassbeck and Professor Bongo Adi. Both are renowned professors in economics, in world economics, as well as in Nigeria when it comes to Professor Adi. I will hand the microphone over to them for them to introduce themselves. Professor Flassbeck, please.
Yeah, my name is Heiner Flassbeck. I've been working on many stations in my life in the finance ministry in Germany, a very long time at UNCTAD, where I've been dealing with development strategies. Globalization and development strategies was a division that I headed, and now I'm mainly writing books.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Flassbeck. Let me hand over to Professor Adi.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Professor Bongo Adi. I'm a professor of economics and data analytics at Lagos Business School. Before returning to Nigeria, I had my studies in Japan. So I spent about 10 years in Japan while I was a student, and also started my lecturing in Japan before deciding to come back to Nigeria. So while in Nigeria, I have been very active, both in the classroom and in the public, dialogue. So currently, I sit on the board of several companies where I advise companies on how they navigate, the global disruptions. I am also a very active member of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, where I am the chair of the editorial subcommittee. That's amongst other different things that I do. And I'm also a public speaker. I'm also a very regular face on Nigeria's media, both print and electronics, commenting on governance issues, economic, macroeconomic issues, both around the country and the subcontinent of West Africa and Africa as well.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm sure our audience is very excited to hear your professional and well-researched information on the topic that we're going to talk about today. Today, we're going to talk about BRICS. We have been hearing a lot about BRICS, and BRICS membership has been growing. Today, we'll focus on the implications of BRICS for the world economy and for Africa. We know that Nigeria became a BRICS partner beginning of this year in January. They have this partner status, which enables them to participate in selected formats, not as a full membership. We hope that will come soon. And the BRICS was at the beginning just 5 countries. For our audience, BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Meanwhile, so many other continents have, and so many other countries have joined the BRICS, so that currently the membership of BRICS accounts to 45% of the world population. And when it comes to economics, it contributes 36% of the global GDP. There's a comparison now between what the G7 members are contributing to the world economy when we compare it to BRICS. G7 is contributing 29% when it comes to 2024, according to IMF. That's what they are contributing. So we believe that the reduced 29% is in account to the increase and expansion in BRICS. And when it comes to Nigeria, just a snapshot of what is happening in Nigeria economically, then we'll start with the questions and hope for informative answers from you. Nigeria is currently at a 30 to 35% year-to-year inflation rate. And the Naira is very volatile, but Nigeria has managed to stabilize its Naira and has managed to achieve a GDP growth of about 4.7%, according to the current news. I hope, Professor Adi, that you give us some more information on that. So let's go into the first question. The first question I will address to you, Professor Flassbeck. With their expansion, BRICS claims a stronger voice in the global economic system. How does the growing BRICS weight change the balance of power vis-a-vis traditional economic centers? And what opportunities does this specifically create in African economies like Nigeria?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, the answer is not simple because it's a question of power. We're talking about power, and power is not just the quantitative relations in this world, as we all know. It's military power, it's kind of traditional political power that exists in some ways. And insofar, it's not so easy to say what BRICS could and should claim. Definitely, BRICS should claim more, but the question is how to do that. If you just go to Washington and say we want a higher share in the IMF or so, it has been tried time and again by many developing countries, and it never worked out really. So the question is how to challenge the G7, and how to challenge the industrial countries. I do only see one way to do that, namely to be very bold, and to say we do not need the IMF in the future anymore. See, this is the simple answer. If all the BRICS countries and maybe including other developing countries, say we do not want and we do not need the IMF anymore in the future, then that is the game changer. That is the big game changer, because the IMF is still the institution. It has a monopoly in assisting countries in trouble. It still has this monopoly, despite BRICS being existent for quite some time, despite BRICS being enlarged quite substantially. The IMF still has the monopoly in assisting countries in trouble. And this has to change. So what BRICS would need is to create an institution that is the competitor to the IMF, or an alternative to the IMF. Indeed, an institution where a developing country with trouble, financial trouble in particular, we can discuss later what exactly that means. A country with financial trouble can go and can say, you have to help me for some time to overcome the actual difficulties. And then we are accepting kind of assistance or kind of conditionality or something. At least we're accepting your guidance for the time that you're helping us. And this is the crucial point. If you do not do that step, the G7 and the dominating powers in the IMF can always say, oh, let them do whatever they want. But still, we have the majority in that institution that is the strongest in financial affairs in this world.
Thank you, Professor Flassbeck. Now let's go to Professor Adi. What do you think of removing IMF? Do you think BRICS is ready for that?
That's a very big question. I don't think it's a straightforward one because already many African countries are, indebted to the IMF. They are committed to that organization. So is it going to be very easy to delink from such a very powerful financial institution that has, helped the government of several African countries? That's not going to be easy because it's not just an economic question; it's also a political question. So, so economic question is straightforward. If a country has an alternative, as it is beginning to emerge recently, that maybe having private capital such as Dangote, might actually be a force for good that could over time begin to step into, that space that the international lending institutions used to occupy. In fact, just this morning, I read that Dangote signed a $1 billion investment in Zimbabwe. So he's committing $1 billion to developing several critical sectors in Zimbabwe over the next few years. And I think he has done same in Ghana around sugar. He's doing the same in I think Ethiopia as well. And so he keeps going. And actually, you were talking about Nigeria stabilizing foreign exchange. Many people attribute that stability to, the inflow that Dangote refinery has really, brought into the markets, which has started to alleviate the pressure on the demand for government insufficient or scarce resources. So you could see that, private capital has the ability to do a whole lot. But again, so that's economics that I would like to speak to. But the political part of it is completely a different kettle of fish, as they said. Now, when you look at the public choice theory in economics, why do governments borrow? They only think about short term. A particular regime has at most 8 years. Okay, so if they incur any debt, they're going to leave that for the future generation. So when you look at the thinking trajectory or the thinking horizon of a typical politician in Africa, it's always short term. It's never more than 4 years, regardless of what they vision. They may make 50 billion year plans, but their interest is usually in a very short 4-year or 8-year cycle. So what happens after is not necessarily their business. So why am I saying that? If it is going to be easy for a government to raise the much needed capital, maybe to bridge funding gaps from IMF, and this is a political system that cares about re-election. It doesn't want to increase taxes so that the people may not vote against their party. So the alternative they have is to quickly run to IMF or to the World Bank or all the creditor nations to borrow money. They are not borrowing for themselves. They are borrowing for the nation. It is the future generation. So there's an intergenerational issue here. And there, so we do not have strong institutions to, for instance, keep these governments in check. We don't even have strong institutions to ensure that we hold them accountable for the way they spend, these loans that they get. So what I'm saying in effect is that the political incentive to always go to IMF or to other lending institutions is stronger than any other thing that we can talk about. Yes, I hear about the BRICS, but so that's the optics. I look at that as merely optics, because I also deal with the government, the people in government, the politicians. So I know the way they think, and I know that they will always cite BRICS as just an optics. But when the chips are down, they will still do what they normally do, which is to look or go, take the easier way out. So they're always going to take the easier path, and the easier path always is borrowing. Okay, so I faced this same question recently when I was on TV. The anchor was asking me, some questions about government borrowing. That he didn't have a good understanding, I suppose, about the foreign reserve, because we have had a creation in our foreign reserve in recent times. Okay, so it has been building up in the 40 billions. So this TV host was like, since we are having this experiencing this growth, why doesn't the government, stop borrowing? But I'm like, see, what they look at when they look at this, their foreign reserve, it actually bolsters their confidence to go borrowing more, because that sounds like a collateral that this country is in a strong footing, so give them higher credit rating and so on. So they will always abuse such privilege. And that's exactly what happens. So what am I saying? It is easy to say, okay, BRICS can actually step in to, fund the gap. But there is always this incentive on the part of politicians in Africa, because that's where the sickness of Africa lies. Sickness of Africa lies in its politics and its politicians. So we just stop borrowing, we just stop engaging with this, IMF and so like. So that's the big question that we need to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Adi. Before I go to you, Professor Flassbeck, to give us some insight on the global view of what Professor Adi has shared with us, let me just share some information that we have concerning BRICS. So we have the new development bank under BRICS, which has approved $34 billion since 2016. And has grown 22%, and 22% of them in local currency, which from my point of view helps stabilize the local currency and is good for the African community. BRICS members are also discussing the BRICS pay system, which would be a common settlement platform for local currencies, which also would pay into stabilizing the local currency. Also, dollar share of global foreign exchange reserves fell from 71% to 58% 2023, according to IMF. So renminbi holds 2.8%, and we can see that BRICS is changing the constellation in the world economic. I mean, it's just a little bit, but they are still doing something. So I think they are maybe a power in future to reckon with in the global economic constellation. Nigeria has been selling part of its crude oil, to the Dangote refinery in Naira since October 24. So we see a consensus to strengthen the local currency. Now, Professor Adi, you've brought in the private sector. So we now have the private sector, we have the IMF, and we have the BRICS as a source of loan and a source of borrowing for the African or the African economy. Now, my next question is, how sustainable is this de-dollarization, that is moving away from the dollar, moving away from the IMF and going to the local currency by BRICS so far? And which concrete instruments or policies benefit the African country? So let me just pose this question to Professor Flassbeck.
Yeah, thank you. Well, again, I have to be a bit more fundamental, so to say. If you go back, why was the IMF founded at the end of the Second World War? Well, it was due to the fact that the world was looking for and searching for and finding in the end a global monetary system called Bretton Woods. That system, the IMF, should be something like the central bank of the central banks, or the center of monetary stability in the world. But this is long gone, and we're living in a totally different world. But the IMF is still there, and the IMF still plays an important role. Why? Well, this is easy to understand because we haven't found a reasonable monetary system in this world. Let me take the example of Nigeria. If you have 30-something% inflation rate, there is no institution in this world that will give you a guarantee that your exchange rate will more or less remain constant in real terms, which means that you only depreciate by 28% vis-a-vis the United States or vis-a-vis Germany or the euro, because they have 2% inflation rate. So the original idea was that the real exchange rate should be rather constant, so that we have a level playing field for companies all around the world. That does not exist anymore. So the question is, who is going to protect you against speculative attacks from the capital markets that happen every day somewhere in the developing world, mainly through so-called carry trade, where people are using the wonderful high interest rates in Nigeria and elsewhere for carrying money for 3 days or for 3 hours or for 3 minutes into the country, and then to withdraw it as soon as something happens or a depreciation looms. So this is the single most important source of distortions in the last 30 years in the world economy. And whenever you get into the trap of being then overvalued and you have to devalue your currency, we had numerous crises. I've been in nearly all of these crises: the Asian crisis, the Latin American crisis, the Russian crisis, and all of these different currency crises. And it was always the same pattern, namely the same pattern was that you had to devalue, but you cannot just let your currency float, because when you just float, you will be facing a huge devaluation wave that will go much too far and will destroy part of your economy, because you have then to increase interest rates to extreme levels to stop that depreciation. And this is the situation I'm talking about. It's not just government debt that Mr. Adi was mentioning. It is mainly this external question, the exchange rate question. Who is going to protect you in such a case? I have been seeing cases like the famous crisis in Brazil and Argentina, where in principle it was very simple to protect the country, namely by an international guarantee that if the G7 would have said, the Argentinian peso we only allow depreciation of the Argentinian peso of 25%, then it will be 25%, because all the markets in the world will believe it, that the G7 is able to realize that. So, but it had never been done. And then you have to understand the logic for ideological reasons. I have been proposing myself to Larry Summers, my then colleague in the United States, said, let's do something very simple like that. Let's stop the Brazilian peso from devaluing, and the country doesn't need interest rate hikes and doesn't need a big recession. No, he said, only over my dead body. And why did he say only over my dead body? Because they are not interested in a stable monetary system. The stable monetary system is not in the interest of the developed countries, because too many people in the developed countries are earning and profiting from the system. And I do not have to tell you where these people are sitting. They're sitting in Wall Street and the financial district in London. So, and this is the power game behind. And if the developing countries do not see that they are part of this very primitive power game, and that they're used and that they're abused by this power game, then nothing will change. But again, we're talking about a big step. You're mentioning many quantitative small steps, but I'm always talking about the big step, because I do not see that things will change if you do not go the big step, namely to say we are creating an institution that is helping us in the case that we are devaluing. If China is a member of such an institution, China can bail out anyone who is in trouble without any problem. And BRICS is big enough. You mentioned it. BRICS is so big that they can do it. But there are barriers. I don't know where exactly the barriers are, but there are barriers, obviously, huge barriers that have to be overcome.
Thank you, Professor Flassbeck. When I listen to you, I think of the jungle system, where it's about the survival of the fittest, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It looks like it's a
That's
survival
what it's
of
all
the
about.
fittest.
That's exactly
Yes.
what it's all about.
Yes, and I think our viewers need to understand this, because the narrative is helping Africa, but in the real sense, the world is a survival of the fittest. So it's a calling of Africa itself to look into itself and look for solutions within itself, because of the survival of the fittest I said before. Now let's look at a little bit a micro view of Nigeria, and this is to you, Professor Adi. So Nigeria and China RMB swap framework is intended to facilitate the renminbi settlements for imports from China. It's been established for a couple of years now, and in practice, importers often prioritize US dollars due to liquidity, hedging instruments, supplier preferences, and compliance requirements. Elevated inflation and policy rates keep borrowing and hedging costs high. RMB swap operational, but is constrained by liquidity and supplier norms. Now, my question is, how practical is RMB settlements for Nigerian firms in reality? Is there availability, spread, hedging, compliance, and where are the biggest operational and bottlenecks?
All right, thank you very much. Again, another deep question, and we have to approach it from several perspectives. Let's look at it, because the philosophy, or the reason why the swap was initiated in the first place was also to see, if the pressure on the Naira could be ameliorated. Several years ago, I think that was about 2018, thereabouts. But, well, that didn't stave off any of the challenges that the Naira has had to suffer all that while. And another issue is that, much of the trade with China, I will classify it as more or less informal and semi-formal. If we look at what Nigeria imports, the trade relationship with China, we import the bulk of Chinese manufactured products across different things. So that is what defines our trade relationship with China. Is hugely one-sided. So what we export to China versus what we get from China. So given that China holds this enormous advantage, right? So we've seen our business people establish so many informal mechanisms that help them to, meet their foreign exchange requirements in China without having to pass through the established central bank swap system. So if you really take a poll of a survey of individual business people, how many of them has had to take advantage of the swap? I'm not sure you get anything satisfying, because most of them who are really established business people, who mostly import products from China, already have, some informal settlement mechanisms, right? Because they've got some Chinese, those who stay in China, who have some businesses in Nigeria, and those who stay, who are Chinese as well, okay, who have some other businesses in Nigeria. So they have found a way to mutually settle themselves without having to pass through any of these currency challenges, right? And some people also in Nigeria, when they import products from China, they do not have to send, look for dollar to buy or renminbi. So they look for someone who maybe lives in Turkey or lives in the America who can wire the funds to the, to the exporter, and then they take delivery of their goods here and then pay the person who might be a Nigerian in Naira. So that is the way this informal mechanism makes such policies redundant. So for me, the renminbi swap is superfluous. The truth is that it does not address anything, and you can never hear anything about it in the news. Unlike when we talk about the open exchange platform, for dollar, where everybody can, play on willing buyer, willing seller basis. So you don't hear that about renminbi swap and all of that, because the demand for it isn't as strong as government has intended. So that's what I can say to that. So whether it has functioned or not remains to be seen. So, but my interaction with businesses, my understanding of it is that it's just there, but most times people don't take access of it. And of course, you also know that the central bank itself doesn't have a very good history of, seamless transaction flows. When people make requests, fill out the Form M, they know how long the tedious process is. And, when it takes time, business people do not have such, largesse of time. So they always look for the cheaper way out. So part of that would explain why that didn't quite deepen or generate the impact that the government had intended for it.
Thank you, Professor Adi. I can hear from both your answers that it's more of the willingness of the people. For example, this RMB swap, it's the willingness of the people to look at the long-term goal and the long-term benefit for the country a stabilized currency would have, than looking for informal means of growing their business. And from the answer from Professor Flassbeck, it's also the willingness of the global north to see a developed Africa. Because the benefit of a developing or an underdeveloped Africa is much higher currently than the benefit they see from a developed country. So let's look at a question that addresses this, that addresses the global South. So we have trade and investment flows in the global South. We have intra-BRICS trade mounted to USD 800 billion in 2023. And China remains the largest individual investor in Africa when it comes to FDI stock of USD 49 billion. And India is also ramping up, right? Also doing some investment in Africa as well, a total of 97 billion. Europe remains the largest trading partner for Africa in overall. It shares 33% to 24% between 2010 and 2024. Now, my question is, do you see signs that an independent South-South economic space under BRICS leadership is emerging in the coming years? I know, Professor Adi, you mentioned that it's just schematics, but because of the results and the research that came out of the result that came out of research, BRICS seems to be gaining a foothold in the world economy. So do you see in the coming years that there will be a reduction of the classic North-South dependency to a South-South dependency? Let me just ask Professor Flassbeck this first.
Well, First, I have to make something clear. I did not say the Americans do not want to develop Africa. That's not the point. I just said they have their economic interests on Wall Street, for example, and that is preventing an Africa. It's not the purpose of Wall Street to prevent Africa from becoming rich and to catch up. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to make money. It's very simple. But this purpose to make money is preventing Africa from doing reasonable things, and that is why Africa has to emancipate. This is the simple point. And you see, Europe created the European Monetary Union, which is really not a perfect thing, but it was an attempt to get some independence from the US and to reduce the influence of the dollar and to reduce the importance of the dollar. And this is the only way to do it in the end. The only way is that, as I said, you find collaborators, you find partners in Africa, only in Africa or beyond Africa. Beyond Africa is better because they're the big powers. But even inside Africa, there could be moves to better coordinate the countries monetarily, not coordinate everything, but to coordinate the monetary affairs in the countries, in particular to harmonize in a certain way the inflation rate and to bring down the inflation rate. And then there would be a chance to emancipate on the monetary field. If it is not happening, there may be many things that happen in trade, but trade is always dependent on the financial side, on the monetary side. You cannot take the one away from the other. They're very much dependent, and so you always need a good financing mechanism, and you need always a reasonable refinancing mechanism if you're in trouble, as I said. So the simple point to make is, I give you an example. The crucial example is, how did China do it? How did China go through all the affairs without a big crisis? And the answer is very simple. The answer is very straightforward and very simple. Unfortunately, nobody knows it, but I think I know it. So I have long experience with China. What happened, China had the last financial crisis that China had that hardly anyone knows was in 1993. And at that point, China decided very strongly, with its strong government, obviously, decided to fix the yuan to the dollar at a certain rate and to keep it there. And they did it, but they did it different from the Argentinians or the Brazilians who attempted to do the same thing. The Chinese did it very consequently, namely, at the same time when they fixed the yuan to the dollar, they were able, this is crucially important, they were able to bring the inflation rate down to the American level. From that point on, there is nearly no inflation difference between the United States and China. And that brought about China not only enormous stability externally and internally in monetary affairs, which is very important, but it brought about very low interest rates, the possibility to have very low interest rates compared to the rest of the world and compared to their own development. I've just shown in my new book that China is the only country in the last 30 years that was able to keep its interest rate consequently below the inflation rate. I mean, the nominal interest rate consequently below the nominal growth rate. The only country in the world that was able to do that consequently and consistently year after year. And that was simply due to the fact that they could deal with the Americans because they were as stable as the Americans. Now, they're much bigger than any African country, but nevertheless, it gives you an idea where the crucial things are. If you're able to stabilize your monetary system, your national monetary system, and you do it with some partners, then you're able to emancipate from the Americans, because the only thing they do not like, the guys on Wall Street, not the politicians in the US. I don't talk about them. They don't care about the rest of the world anymore. But the guys in the Wall Street, they like countries that are unstable. They like countries with huge inflation rates. They like countries with dramatically floating exchange rates, because that gives them the opportunity to make money. And this is very crucial, but it's very little understood that this stability is absolutely decisive for the overall success of the economy.
Thank you, Professor Flassbeck. Now let's while we're staying on that topic of North-South dependency, what role could Nigeria play? We already see some kind of signs of it, as you mentioned in the beginning, of Dangote providing resources for Zambia and for Ghana. What role would Nigeria play when we look at the coming away from North-South dependency to South-South dependency, and then adding the private sector to that equation?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm enjoying the conversation so far, the insights that Professor Flassbeck is bringing from Wall Street. Yeah, but, so as an insider living in Nigeria and in Africa, I tend to see things from our own perspective. So mentioning Dangote, there is this idea of Afri-capitalism. So Afri-capitalism, which is that Africa can also push the boundaries of the global capitalist network by creating homegrown financial solutions to its problems. So again, when we talk about the BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So that was the original countries in that moniker. I think at the same time, in the mid 2000s, when that moniker came on, there was also this the idea of the mint, which was Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, Turkey, right? But at that point in time, so we had the BRICS, we also had the mint. Now we only talk about the BRICS. Nobody remembers the mint. And the reason is not far-fetched. Why nobody talks about the mint is simply because Nigeria, the end in the middle of that, went under from 2015. So we forgot about that. Now Nigeria wants to rejoin, but there was another one that was being groomed, the mint. After BRIC, there was mint as well. So what I'm trying to say here is that Nigeria is consistent in being inconsistent. So, and that's the biggest problem for us. What role can Nigeria play? Because you need to get your own house in order first before you can lead others. I think that's the primary truth here. And I don't need to sound too economistic or, to stress that point. By the time the former president, Olusegun Obasanjo, was leaving office, Nigeria has actually strengthened its macro prudential institutions. The currency, just as Professor Flassbeck mentioned, was stable. We had relative stability. The Naira was at the same exchange rate to the dollar of 120 to 140 to the dollar for almost a decade. And that period, Nigeria recorded an average growth rate of 6.5%. There was a year we grew 11%. And everybody started to sing, the rhythm of Africa Rising. The Africa Rising, song was actually written by and for Nigeria because people could see the signs. I remember all the rating institutions, Goldman Sachs, so Nigeria had very strong ratings, credit ratings across all profiles of assets. Nigerian banks were leading when it comes to ratings in among their global peers. And then the Nigerian banks were internationalizing as well, opening up branches in so many African countries, in so many in London and some leading financial capitals of the world. We saw that happen. And then Nigerian experts in diaspora started to make their way back home. So we had, the reverse migration, whereby Nigerians with skills from all over the world were returning in their numbers to take up positions in Nigeria. So we now started to have an accumulation of top global talents in Nigeria who were ready to spearhead the growth. The middle class was also burgeoning, growing in leaps and bounds. We saw this happen not too long ago. So the fiscal buffers were right. Nigeria's external reserve, I think, clocked about $67 billion. So everybody thought Nigeria had escaped poverty and was on a self-sustaining path to economic emancipation. And with Nigeria, it will take other African countries, along its stride. But what happened? All of a sudden, just in the past decade as well, from 2015, every one of those threads started to unravel. So the growth started to unscramble, one after the other. We had a single-digit inflation for a very long period of time. But all of a sudden, today we're talking about inflation in triple digit, in the 30s, in the 30s, whereas we had the government, the fiscal strategy had a budget target inflation of 9.5%, and we maintained it. Some years, inflation came to 7%. Single-digit inflation was the order of the day. All of that became eroded in no time. So all the institutions that came with that also became eroded. Now today, and then after years of, again, macroeconomic mismanagement, we are today where we are. So when we talk about Nigeria's leadership, so these are some of the issues that we need to confront. And then how do I look at China? Because China has played, professors said China is the only country in the past 30 years that has managed, to fix their exchange rates, achieve a low inflation target and interest rates over that period, which enabled them to spearhead the growth we've seen in China, unprecedented growth. That China overtook Japan and the second largest economy in the world. And of course, ran Europe on aground, and then is dumping their products all over the world. China became the industrial machine. From one statistics I saw the other day, Visual Capitalist, if you sum up the industrial capacities of the America, of Germany, of Europe, Britain, of France, of Russia, and India, which other country? If you put them all together, and Japan, Chinese industrial capacity still tops all of these put together. So we need to also appreciate the role of industrialization and export-led growth in all of this. China could maintain single-digit inflation and manage their exchange rate the way they have effectively done because they were very, very strong when it came to exports. Okay, so their current account was every year very, very strong. Now, Nigeria was able to lead, also maintain stability in both macro and then micro areas, in the sense that the purchasing power of the average household, of the average Nigeria, started to rise. Okay, Nigeria did that as well when we had relative stability in the oil price and the volume of oil production was also high. But then we didn't take the advantage to diversify the economy and our exports profile. Okay, our product space remained colored in oil and gas. So we didn't do any diversification. And then when each time there is some turbulence with oil price, our economy will take the hit. And that's so if we have climbed up at one time, once that hit happens, we come down. So that's been the volatility we've always experienced when it comes to Nigeria's economic fortune. Now, this sort of instability doesn't guarantee, any sort of, will I say, leadership influence. Okay, and we have lost all of that. In the past, Nigeria was a strong force, at least in the West African region, whether it is in ECOWAS, where we also tried to form the monetary union. And then at a point, we mooted the idea of a currency for the West African sub-region. But because of Nigeria's falling grace, all of that did not see the light of the day. So when we talk about the role of Nigeria, I think I am really hard-pressed, to see where we can get from where we are currently, because you will see the leadership that is still grappling with simple things such as power generation. Yeah, I call it simple because most African nations have solved that problem. Ghana, okay, large parts of the Ghana do not suffer power outages. Other countries in Africa, like Kenya, are better when it comes to infrastructure. So infrastructure in Nigeria remains very poor. In fact, as a proportion of the GDP, I think it's less than 30%, the infrastructure stock of the country. So what I'm saying is that I'm only trying to diagnose the situation. So not that I am talking down on my nation, but this is a reality. So for us to be a leader, we were, but then we have fallen from that crest. And today we are grappling with so many mundane issues that when you begin to consider Nigeria's situation, you will be really anxious, because it appears that we can't just, the government seems to have lost the capacity to manage, its own development. So now the little stability that we have is simply because an individual has managed to build something that government has failed to do in decades, in more than 2 decades. We've not managed to maintain a serviceable refinery until Dangote came on stream. So these are some of the practical issues that one needs to consider before you begin to envisage any role for Nigeria's leadership, whether it's in regional affairs or global affairs. That's why I keep talking about optics. So the optics are different from the reality.
Let me
Yes,
add
please.
one thing in response to Professor Adi. Well, China, you're right. China was mainly in the first round successful in terms of exports, but China is so extraordinary because it created as well, and this is the crucial thing, it created as well very good conditions for its domestic companies, for the creation of domestic companies. Look at China today. China today is rivaling Germany in machine tool industry, where 20 years ago they imported everything from Germany, everything. Now they're rivaling Germany, and that is a good development. And but that is not only export. For exports, you're anyway competitive as a poor country, and China was 20, 30 years ago a poor country. You're anyway competitive if you let in all the foreign investments because they are highly productive. They have very high. They bring in their high productivity with their company and with their production sites. They have the high productivity and they combine it with very low wages in China or elsewhere in any developing country, and they're super competitive anywhere in the world. But the crucial thing is that you not just rely on these foreign companies to come in and to build up your economy, but you do it to yourself. And for that you need very good monetary condition, low interest rates, say blankly. You need very low interest rates for your domestic people, for your people that would have a chance to build up something, a small business, or whatever they are able to do. And this is the crucial thing. Look at Eastern Europe. We have countries there. They have wonderful direct investment from Germany and other countries, but nothing happens internally. The people are going away because they're frustrated with the development of their own economy. And so this is the crucial point. Your people, your native people, your people in the country, they need good investment conditions. And to combine successful export with attractive monetary conditions inside for your own people, that is the crucial thing. And that is the difficulty. And that is, maybe we use the chance of another talk another time, that is the mistake of the traditional orthodox economics, because they do not give you a way into that direction. They teach you keep inflation low by high interest rates, and that's all nonsense, and then you end up nowhere. That is not possible. And China did it in a heterodox way, and that was much more successful.
Yeah, Prof. I think we are saying the same thing. Actually, we quite agree. For the China to be competitive in export, it means that its domestic companies, domestic firms, were competitive, were strong. So they created this incentive for the domestic firms to really compete with the rest of the world. I think that is what the reason for their competitiveness. So coming back to Nigeria, we do not have such conditions, and that's a very big problem, because the way I say it, so I always look at global value chains. For every product that you take up today, you will notice that if you trace the value chain, well, I doubt there will be any significant one that doesn't pass through China. Any global value chain, whatever product, whatever competitive world-class products that you refer to, its value chain must pass through China at one point or the other. Now, when it comes to Africa, largely, I doubt there is any particular value chain that any African company is dominant, and none is actually headquartered or owned by any Africa. So because when we talk about whether the BRICS can save Africa or not, I look at the practical dimensions. And when I look at the industrial capacity, their control and the dominance of global value chains. So what has given China the edge it has today is because, yes, I like the idea you brought up on how it originated. China maintained, conducive monetary conditions that helped their firms to leverage. I quite understand that. So, but that's giving them, a huge advantage in the global value chain. But again, because it's a kind of a recursive situation. China could do that because they also were able to create the necessary inflows of financial capital, because when they trade, they can really, stabilize their currency. They can defend themselves, against whatever the Wall Street hawks may be doing, right? Because they already have sources of foreign exchange. In the case of so many African countries who are still reliant on natural resources, and then to exploit these natural resources, they do not control the technology value chain for the exploitation of the natural resources in their land. They still depend on foreign technologies and a whole lot on foreign expertise. So these are all the problems, right? That, if our government and the politicians are sincere to themselves, and if they are abreast of global situations, these are the first things that we need to address. But as it is, we are not addressing these things. And then sometimes I hear our people talk about BRICS and all of that. I do not place so much hope on those institutions, because I believe that at the point when Nigeria recorded some bit of success during the regime of Olusegun Obasanjo, those were internal institutional reforms that the country deliberately carried out. And that gave us, some mileage. But as soon as that government left, we now have politicians that do not understand some of these things, the linkages between, institutional reforms and economic growth and global dominance. So once we lost that, I think everything came, crumbling down. That is the story, that I want to say.
Thank you, Professor Adi, and thank you, Professor Flassbeck, for your input concerning China. I see some similarities between China and Nigeria. First of all, the growth, the amount, the largeness of the population. Nigeria has 230 million population, and also the age is young, strong youth, which could contribute to the economy, especially when we're thinking of promoting the entrepreneurial ability of them. That is investing in the SMEs, investing in the small, medium-sized enterprises, which we know is the wheel that is that brought China to where it is currently. It's that investment on and in small, medium-sized companies, making loan accessible to them, and also creating an environment where they can thrive. So when it comes to politics, that's where Nigeria is different from China. I think it is a positive thing that the number of years that one particular leader is in position in China also plays a role, because you have somebody following the same goal for a very long time, which improves the economy. So coming back to what Professor Flassbeck said about the IMF, can the NDB, that's the New Development Bank, be an alternative to the IMF? I just keep going back there because I also believe that the more African countries lose their dependency on IMF, the better it will be for us as a continent. So, Professor Flassbeck, my last question on this topic: the New Development Bank, could it be an alternative when we see that it's approved $34 billion already for development in Africa?
Yeah, thank you. It's definitely positive. It definitely is an important assistance, but it does not replace the IMF. It is not replacing the emergency the IMF in an emergency situation. I do not see that because, as I said before, the IMF has the monopoly of giving a dollar credit to countries in trouble. This is accepted by more or less everybody in the world. And if you don't want it anymore, then you have to say no. We don't do it anymore. But that has to be done then by BRICS as a whole, or by Africa, or whoever it is, or a group of countries. Europe, for example, could have said that. Europe could say, we don't accept the IMF at all anymore. We're doing it all by ourselves. No problem at all. No, there's no economic problem that Europe couldn't do it. Just for reasons of friendship with the Americans and so they didn't never consider that, but they could easily do it. But that is the only way. Only if you do that step out to say we are self-confident in a case of emergency of one of our members, and we help that country, we bail it out, and we give it a different conditionality from the IMF conditionality, because that's all the primitive neoclassical conditionality that kills countries and doesn't help them. Then if you don't do that step, then not much will change. Then you will have some gradual improvements, but not a major improvement. And insofar, I'm skeptical because the discussion in the BRICS, the point is, I never nowhere see a discussion inside the BRICS where one of the BRICS countries would take the leadership to say, let's really discuss these core of the matter things that I mentioned in the course of our discussion today. Let's discuss that. No, they shy away from that. They go in whatever direction where they can easily do things without confronting the Americans. I can understand that. It's always difficult to confront the Americans in this world. They are still very powerful, no doubt about it. But now they're going more into an isolationist direction. No? Trump is just caring about the Caribbean or so, but no longer about the world. And he's not joining the G20. I heard in South Africa, and so they're becoming more isolationist. And if they're becoming more isolationist, and if they're concentrating on themselves, which is fine, let them do it. But then the world should reconsider being dependent on an institution that sits in Washington and is strongly influenced by the United States. That doesn't make sense. It does not make, under the Trump administration, makes much less sense than before. And so far, this is what the world has to do, and there is nothing short of that. There is no simple solution. Unfortunately, there's no way of saying let's try some easy ways and we find a solution. Unfortunately, I do not see that.
Thank you, Professor Flassbeck. Professor Adi, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think we seem to be aligned on so many things. Yeah, with the BRICS Save Africa, this is not our first foray into having this, international alliances. I remember the non-aligned movement during the East-West divide of the communist Russia and all that. So Nigeria was part of the non-aligned movement of 77 countries and all of that. Maybe then they could play one power against the other, whether the Soviet bloc or the Western bloc, all that. Now, when it comes to continental alliances, I've spoken about the ECOWAS, Economic Community for West African States. And then we also wanted to transit from that. If you look at the Lagos Accord during the time of the military junta of Gowon in 1975, when they had that Lagos Accord. So there was a plan when ECOWAS was built or was first established. So ECOWAS is about how many years now? That's 50 years, yeah? So 1975. So ECOWAS was supposed to also, follow on the heels of European Union. So they will have a monetary union out of it, and then there will be the ECU, the regional currency. Now, that never saw the light of the day. Then we go to African Union. So we also have so many African Union plans to set up a monetary union and all that. We haven't seen that, take off. So BRICS, I already mentioned there was also, so that you will not forget that there was Mint alongside BRICS. Today, nobody talks about Mint. It's only about BRICS. Okay, so yeah, there is a potential. I think it will be a good addition in the sense that there will be alternative sources of funding development in Africa. But I keep on saying, based on what I know about this system, that our challenge is not the lack of capital. Right. I already recounted how Nigeria, made so many unforced errors. Okay. So Nigeria, made so many unforced errors. There's someone who describes Nigeria's situation as, this, there's this English saying that, when somebody narrowly escaped disaster, you said the person, snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. In our own case in Nigeria, we always manage to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Those are self-inflicted wounds. They are not caused by the IMF. So I wouldn't be blaming IMF for what I see happen in Nigeria on a daily basis. Yes, that may give them some sort of incentive. But honestly, when I consider our politicians, the way they think, the way they plan, and the way they do things, I am scared that nobody is causing Nigeria's woes. Nigeria is on a suicidal path. So nobody is causing that problem for us. I believe that is not a problem. Dangote has proven that something can be done. And if I wish you listen to some of the interviews that Dangote grants these days. He said that if he knew that he was going to encounter what he passed through, that he would never build that refinery. And then when he was asked if he would go through it again, he said never. That will tell you the kind of frustration that the system itself mounts on its own. So that's the system we live in. So imagine how many Dangotes would have emerged if the system were conducive. I wouldn't blame IMF for that. I will not blame IMF for what happened to Nigeria after building the economy to be on a level of 6% average growth for over a decade. And then they lost all of that and now struggling with growth of 2% and celebrating 3%. I will not be blaming IMF. Okay, I know the reason for that. I know the internal challenges that we need to overcome before we can be relevant at any global level. I think that summarizes my point. Thank you.
Just a very short.
Professor Flassbeck. Yeah,
we're coming to an end. I think a very short answer. No, I'm not blaming the IMF for all the national errors of the politicians in any country. No, that's not my point. But sometimes the errors are so big that you need the IMF. And then the question comes whether you blame the IMF or not. The errors are done on the national level, that's for sure. And 99% of the errors are done on the national level. Unfortunately, sometimes they go in a direction where nobody can help beside the IMF, and then you get additional trouble because you get punished by the IMF. That is not necessary. That is the only thing that I say. So
IMF
sure,
is an undertaker.
all the solutions, the main solutions are at the national level. I mentioned China. China has done it at a national level. They found a way. That's what I'm saying is they found a way to become independent, and that is not because they are just big, but they had a smart way to stimulate their own economy and to give a chance to their own investors. That is what I wanted to say.
Very true. Very true.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Flassbeck. Now, from both of you, I'd like a final remark from Professor Flassbeck, more on the global view. So which global trends will be decisive for Africa's growth, Africa's economic stability? Is it interest rates? Is it trade fragmentation, energy prices?
It's always a lot of things. It's a very complex picture, but the point is that I think the overarching development that we see now is more a tendency towards nationalism in the industrialized countries. We'll see it in the United States. We see it in Europe and a number of countries. And nationalism always means some kind of isolation. I mentioned it for the United States already. And that you have to be prepared for. The normal trading system that existed for 50 years does not exist anymore. It has been pushed away, and it's just dominated by power and political will. And in so far, it is more important than ever. Despite I know all these attempts have failed in the past, ECOWAS and so on, I observed that quite closely. All that has failed, but nevertheless, I think it's unavoidable that the many different powers in Africa come together, discuss and cooperate much more than they did in the past, much more than they did in the past. Economics is not possible anymore just at a national level. That's not only for oil-producing countries like Nigeria, it's for all kind of countries in the world. Africa itself could form an economic unity that would be able to be some kind of not isolated, but has reduced dependency on the rest of the world. And that would be splendid if such a unit, an African unit, could really then produce, as I said, the economic conditions for their own people, for their citizens, that are conducive to growth and development.
Thank you, Professor Flassbeck. Now, to you, Professor Adi, your last words, this time on a micro view. Which domestic reforms are must-haves for Nigeria?
I think it's infrastructure is a simple one. For us to be relevant, we have to build up our infrastructure assets. We need to solve the energy problem. We need to have transportation. We need to have efficient rail transportation, without which you can't have industrialization. Let's get that clear. So all the talks about global alliances and all of that, and we're not able to feed ourselves. And then, so it's infrastructure basic. And then, we tend to downplay the issue of insecurity. So large swath of the country are under, very insecure, situation. Lives are threatened and then, killed at random on a daily basis. Farmers cannot return to their farms, and that is escalating. In fact, the inflation you cited, food inflation is the core component of that, So food inflation is at an all-time high because not enough food is being produced. Okay, so we need to have these basic problems, basic solutions. That's what Nigeria needs. And if we can fix that, I do not think there is any challenge that Nigeria has currently considered, because we have enterprising young people. You refer to that. The demographic, is that we have predominantly young people. And then Nigeria speaks English, okay? And then tech-savvy population, education is also highly, preponderant. So with that, we have enormous skill and talent that will render the economy competitive if we have the needful. So it's just simple solutions. And Dangote is leading the charge, showing that something can still be done, that all hope is not lost.
Thank you very much. So we'll end with, on a happy note, all hope is not lost for Africa's development, as well as for the relationship and the standing of the global South in relation to the global North. So thank you, gentlemen, for your insights today. So with that, we come to the end of our podcast. Thank you. Today, with that, we come to the end of our podcast on the world economy, BRICS, and the global influence it has both in Nigeria as well as worldwide. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you for attending.
Thank you.